Hello, welcome to my shop. Our project this week is going to be a chip and dip bowl slash cheese and cracker tray. We're going to make a combination platter. What I've got here on the table is a diagram of what I'm going to attempt to make. I like to make these pretty large, and I'm going to make this one actually 16 inches in diameter. I could not find a good turning blank that size, and so what I'm going to do for this project is I'm going to actually segment it. And so what you see here is a diagram of my segmented rings, and I'm going to go through the process that I'm going to use real quick. First of all, let me talk a little bit about design on these large bowls and trays like we're going to make. I've got one here. This one I made several years ago. It is a piece of mesquite, and it's just a large bowl. But when you start getting into a large diameter bowl like this, it's going to have a little bit of weight to it. And this one is designed to be used for serving fruit, possibly salad, something like that. One of the design considerations I always take into account is because it is a large, heavy bowl, it could potentially slide out of the user's hands. And so I like to design some type of rim when I'm making a bowl this size. And so you can kind of see what I did here, just a decorative rim, but that gives me a grip on the edge of the bowl so that hopefully it's not going to slide out of my hands. One thing that we've learned on bowls like this is they don't bounce very well off of a hard floor, so we don't want it to get dropped. Here's another bowl. This one is similar to what we're going to be turning today. And again, I wanted you to take a look at the rim of the bowl. It's got a lip on it so that it does give me something to grip to when I'm moving it from the countertop to the table or back and forth. This one was actually designed as a nut bowl. So you'd put pecans, walnuts, whatever kind of nuts that you had in the center, and then as you crack them, you'd put the shells around the outside. This one's got a lot of miles on it. My nephews and nieces, every time they have access to it, they love to crack the pecans and the walnuts and leave the debris out here. But what we're going to do today is kind of modify this so that it becomes a chip and dip bowl, and then it's also going to be designed so that it could also serve as a cheese and cracker tray. So we're going to be putting a bowl like this in it, and so from this point I want to kind of go back to our drawing and talk about the design elements that we need to give some consideration to. So this is actually the salsa bowl that we will be using for our chip and dip platter. Okay, so what I've done, as I've already pointed out, I've got a 16-inch diameter circle. I'm going to use 12 segments, so I've got it divided into 30-degree increments, and then when I get ready to start cutting my segments, I'll cut those at 15 degrees, and I will then laminate that all together. On the inside, I made a drawing to indicate what I'm going to do with the bowl recess. So what I wanted to do is I measured the diameter of the bowl. It's 5 inches, and then on top of the bowl, once it's actually inserted into the wood, I'm going to have a lip, basically what I would call a rabbet joint, on the outside edge of it so that it does set recessed, and then I'm going to cut a piece of corian to set on top of it, so when it's being used as a chip and dip bowl, you would just simply take the piece of corian off, fill this with your favorite dip, put the chips around it, and you're ready to go. If you're going to use it as a cheese and cracker tray, then you would just set the piece of corian on top of that. It would sit inside that rabbet joint we're talking about so that it would not slide off. And then you would fill the recess out here with crackers. So this one's going to be segmented, so that does throw some complications into things. First of all is my segments for the base of the bowl is actually going to be 8 inches because this is a 16-inch diameter piece. So I've got to have some pretty large chunks of wood to make that up. I didn't have anything on hand that would suffice, so I did go buy some 2-inch thick walnut. Finding a piece of walnut that it's 2 inches thick, and in this case I found a piece that was 10 inches wide. I might just advise you that if you're going to buy a walnut, be prepared for sticker shock because the price is very high right now. At the supplier that I got mine from, it cost $8.25 a board foot. So I got set up so that I could start cutting these wedges, and I'm going to go ahead and show you a few of them because I wanted to get a few set up just for trial purposes to make sure I didn't run into a snag. I'm numbering them as I cut them, and so I've got 4 cut already. And in just a minute I'll move from this to my chop saw, and I'll show you how I'm cutting those. Now this is going to be the base of the bowl, and then we're going to glue a lip around the outside edge of it to give the bowl the depth that we need. And so that's what this segment right here represents. I'm going to cut a segment out here, or the one in the center for the bowl. It's going to be 2 inches wide, and then it'll be segmented just like the outside is. And then this one out here does represent what the outside rim of the bowl is going to look like. It's going to be a 3-inch segment cut just like these. So when this is all said and done, it'll be stacked on top of this, an exterior ring, and then it'll have a center ring to make the inside bowl that this will recess into. Now, I'm going to a lot of trouble to do this, but when you don't have access to a good thick piece of wood that's suitable, then you can go another route and laminate it together. So in this case, I decided that I would prefer to turn edge grain rather than end grain. So I'm going to segment it and make it look a little bit better, and hopefully a little bit easier on me once I start the turning process. So I'm going to turn the camera off, move over and get set up on the chop saw, and then I'll bring you back to show you how I'm going to cut the remaining pieces of my segments. I've got my saw set up, ready to start cutting the remaining segments. Notice that I am numbering the segments as I make my cuts so that I know which order they went in. That way, when I put them back together, get ready to glue up, I can, by flipping this over, it's going to help my joint alignment, and it's going to help prevent any spacing issues that I might have. So I'm going to turn my dust collector on. This chop saw is also loud, so I will only show you a couple of cuts here, and then we'll pick up from there. got all the segments cut, laid out like they're going to glue up. Because this is such a large piece, I'm going to glue 2 pieces together at a time and do them in pairs like that until I get the entire thing glued up. So most likely after I get half of it done, I will need to come back and sand down the middle joint and then glue up the 2 halves. I'll bring you back when I'm to that point. I've got my segments glued up in pairs. I'm going to set these aside, let them dry, and then I'll come back and glue the pairs together until I complete the entire ring. Off camera, I went ahead and set up my wedgie sled for these pieces that are a little bit easier to handle on the wedgie sled. And I've cut that outer ring that'll go on top of the base, and this will be the outside of the bowl. Now I'm going to set up and start cutting that inner ring that's going to go inside the wooden bowl that's going to hold the dip bowl. So give me a chance to get that set up, and then I'll bring you back and show you a few of those cuts. I've got my sled set up at a 15-degree angle, and I'll just make alternating cuts. I've already made one cut to make sure I had everything set properly. I'll make this cut. After I make that cut, then I'll bring that piece down, set it against my stop block, and make the next cut until I've got all 12 segments. Because that blade is raised so high, extreme caution is required. I'll go ahead and move these pieces out of the way because they're going to get trapped back here on the back side of my table. So rather than having a kickback, I'll get those out of the way and complete my cuts. Okay, I cut 13 pieces just in case I need to replace one. We'll fit those together and see how well they're going to glue up. I'm going to sand the feathers off the edges real quick. Just lightly tap those and get these ready to glue up. Once I put it back on the clamp, or put the clamp back on, I'll decide if I'm going to glue it up in 2 halves or go ahead and glue the entire thing. The joints fit pretty tight, so I'm thinking I'll go ahead and glue it all up in one shot. Got pairs glued up. I'm going to come back now and glue up 2 halves, and I have decided I'm going to glue it in 2 halves, and then I'll sand that center joint before I glue up the entire ring. I've taken my segments out of the clamps. Right now they're still in half sections, and so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean up these edges so that I can glue these together. All 3 of them need a good bit of work on them to get them cleaned up enough that they can glue together. Especially this big one, it just gave me a lot of trouble trying to get it glued up like I wanted to, not having adequate bands to put around it. And so let me get these cleaned up, I'll glue them back up, and then I'll bring you back when we are ready to start gluing the segments together. Okay, I've got our 2 halves glued together now. This one took a little bit of work. You can see that my center point is not totally accurate, and so what I'll wind up doing on this is once I have it mounted on the lathe, the surface trued, I'll cut a plug in it and then put another piece in there to hide that. These large pieces turned out to be very difficult to segment with my setup. These pony clamps work great for these larger pieces like this. If you don't have a pair and you use large segments or need to glue up large rings, they work great for that. Here's the next piece. This will be going on top of the base. And then this is that third ring that's going to go in the center, and this one will be the one that has the salsa dish inserted in it. While I'm waiting for this to dry and get set up so that we can put it all together, I've prepared some face plates with a glue block on them. I'm going to go to the lathe now and true these up, get them set up so that when the glue is dried and I'm ready to put them on the lathe, I'm going to be mounting them on a face plate. So I've got a couple of these set up and ready. This face plate is actually designed for the MIDI lathe. I've got a revolving tailstock drive or tailstock center that I'm going to be using. So this will rotate on the tailstock, and then when I have to turn this around and put it on the headstock, I've also got an adapter that will take this thread and then also thread on my large lathe. So that's why I've got two glue blocks set up. I'm going to get these trued up and ready to start putting the project together. Got the face plate mounted on the lathe. What I'm going to do now is true this up, get it ready for us to start mounting our segments to it. I'll also true the other one up that I showed you when I get through with this one. I've got my lathe speed set to about 1,000 RPMs. I'm going to be using a 5/8 inch bowl gouge to clean this edge up and then to do some scraping across the face of it to get it trued up. I'll check that with a straight edge to make sure that I've got a good flat surface. I'll actually want to concave the center of it just slightly so that I have good contact when I glue this on. Okay, slightly high in the center, so I'll get that out and then I'll be ready to sand it. I'm going to sand with this sanding block just to get it trued up well for me. And then while I'm sanding, I'm going to go ahead and touch these edges just to round them off a little bit, take away those sharp corners. And here I do need to be using my dust collector, so I'm going to turn that on. I'll go ahead and get that other one trued up, and then we will come back when I'm ready to start gluing the segments on. I've trued up this second glue block. I mentioned that I had it mounted on a smaller faceplate. The teeth on this one are the threads are designed for the MIDI lathe. I've got this adapter so that I can put it on my big lathe as well. This will come off, and then I can put that live tailstock center on here when I get ready to start gluing on from the tailstock. While we're waiting for the glue to set up, I'm going to go ahead and get my bowl gouges sharpened up. I'm using a 5/8" bowl gouge. I've got the top ring out of the clamp and glued up or mounted on the Longworth chuck. This is a homemade chucking device for larger turnings. Like you've seen, I like to turn large bowls, and I did not have a set of cold jaws that was adequate for some of these large turnings, so I made this. There are plans for this on the internet, and it's a fairly straightforward project. Mine not being a factory made one, it is a little bit difficult to adjust, but with a little finesse you can get it set up like you need it. So right now I've got the rubber stopper type jaws clamped against it. The pressure squeezes the rubber down and it holds against the outside of the turning. What I'm attempting to do is face this down so that I have a good glue surface. And once I have this like I like it, where I'm satisfied with it, then I'll do the same thing with the base and get it ready to glue up. So I'll show you a little bit of this turning. I'm only running at about 300 RPMs. This is not designed for any kind of high-speed type work. I've got the live center pulled up. It's the revolving live center. The only reason that I have this on there is to help stabilize the Longworth jaws, and in the event that it were to come loose, it's going to help capture it before it hits the floor. I'm just going to be using a scraping cut. I've got it turned down where the face is pretty level. I can check it with my straight edge. I've got a slight taper toward the center. So what I'm going to do is sand it a little bit more. And I'll show you a little bit of that process, but I won't show much of that because I have to run the dust collection when I'm doing that. But I'll kind of show you what I'm doing, and then we'll shut this down, remove it, and mount the next piece. I've got a sanding block. Ideally, I would have a block that would fit across the entire surface. It would be much easier to keep it true, but in this case, because of what we're dealing with, I can only sand on one side. I don't want to remove the tailstock just yet. You notice that I lowered my tool rest, and then I use it as a rest for my sanding block. It makes it much easier than trying to hold it freehand. I'm going to turn the dust collector back on and finish this up. I've got this faced off where I'm satisfied now. I put my straight edge on there, and I've got a pretty tight joint going across there. This is going to be the face that is glued to the base, and then this side over here against the chuck is actually going to be the top of the bowl. I mentioned that I was using a homemade Longworth chuck. Some of you may not be familiar with the Longworth chuck. This is a store-bought Longworth chuck. I ordered it from a site on the internet. This one will condense down to about 3.5 inches. So you could put a small turning in there and condense the jaws down. Once you start putting pressure on the screws, it's got some thumb screws on the back that you start applying pressure, and it'll expand these rubber jaws and it'll give it some tension to hold it. The way that these are designed is just by turning the plates against each other, it will expand the jaws, and so it will expand large enough for a 9 3/4 inch bowl. So this one I use on my MIDI lathe. I could use it on this big lathe as well, but you couldn't use it on anything that doesn't have the proper swing. So these are out there and available if you have an interest in them. They're very good chucks, especially if you do a lot of segmented turning. Got this base piece mounted on the Longworth chuck. What I've done is I've just kind of cleaned up a small portion of the center of this so that I can glue my temporary faceplate to it. So I'm going to glue it right here. Again, I have this revolving live center that I'm going to be using in my tailstock. I'm going to glue this on with hot melt glue. So that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, I've got that glued on. I've got pressure from my tailstock pushing the faceplate up against the base piece. Now I'm going to use hot melt glue and run a bead all the way around the outside of it just for some added safety. Okay, that should do what we need. So I'm going to take this out. I'm going to remove the live center on my tailstock, and I'm going to mount this on the headstock then. I'll have to use my adapter when I get ready to do that. But what I want my next goal to accomplish is to get the bottom shaped like I want it. And then I will come back and use this glue block, mount it to the bottom, and then this will be riding on the headstock for the remainder of the project until I get ready to cut the glue block off. Okay, I've got the base of the bowl mounted to my headstock now, so I'm actually in a position that I can start turning. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the very center of this out because my intersection of the joints is not very attractive, and I would prefer that that not be there. So off camera, while we were waiting for glue to dry, I cut this plug. I'm going to cut a hole through the bowl into the waste block on the other side, and I'm going to plug it with this. That's going to make it more attractive, and it's also going to help prevent movement in the future as weather changes, things like that. So that's my next step, is to cut a tenon through here so that I can put a plug in it. I'm going to actually bore a hole in here. I've got a 2 1/4 inch Forstner bit, and that's what I'm going to start with. That'll save me a little bit of time on my cutting this for my plug. Before I get started, I'm going to make sure I've got the center point, and then I want to measure out 1.5 inches so I can mark my hole for that plug when I get ready to finish that up. Okay, so my center point was very accurate because I used my tailstock and my live center to mount this, and so I've got it mounted pretty true. So what I'm going to do is from that point measure out 1.5 inches and get me a mark for my plug. Okay, so that's my 3-inch plug. I do want to sneak up on that when I get ready to start cutting that final shoulder so that I don't have a gap when I get ready to glue this in. But my next task is going to be to cut this mortise so that this plug will fit in here. I am going to turn the dust collector on to help pick up some of these chips. To start turning the shoulders down to the necessary diameter so that this plug will fit in it. I did check the plug up against the pencil mark that I made, and the plug is slightly undersized to that pencil mark, so I'm going to come back and put a second pencil mark inside that just so I remind myself not to get it too big. So we'll work to about that point, and then I'll start checking for fit. I'm going to use a carbide tool for this cut, or at least see how well it's going to work. I may want to change my mind once I get started. Now I'm going to increase the speed just a little bit, but I don't want to get too big, too fast with this large turning. I'm at about 300 right now, so I think I can go up to about 5. So we are about 550 right there. Let me try that and see how well that's going to cut. Okay, as I start getting close to the bottom, it starts wanting to taper out, primarily because this shoulder is rounded just a little bit. It's not a perfectly square cutter. I'll have to correct that here in just a little while. Okay, I'm going to make one more pass, and then I'm going to start checking to make sure I don't get it too big. And you can see how much better This already looks, because I cut that mess out where the intersections weren't meeting up, or the points of the segments, and so this is going to make it look much more attractive. So I'm going to go to a box scraper now. This one has a good sharp edge on it. It's not going to cut all the way the depth that I need, but since it is a straight shoulder, it should make it all, maybe it'll make it all the way. We'll just have to check it and see. Okay, one thing that I don't want to do is force it into the hole. If I were to do that, then I run the risk of cracking some of these segments, weakening those joints, and this thing coming apart on me. So I don't want that to happen. I'm going to make a few more light passes until I get it where it'll fit. I wish I could get the lid to some of the boxes that I make to fit that tight. We still have a little ways to go, so I'm just going to keep using the trial and error method till we get there. Okay, so we can get in there about 1/2 of an inch right now. What that's telling me is that I'm got a slight taper going into the bottom, so I'm going to start working from about that 1/2 inch mark in to the bottom. The outside shoulder is good. Okay, still about the same depth, and if you're like me, tempted to get a mallet and drive that in, or drive it in with my tailstock, but again, we run the risk of separating these glue joints, so we're not going to do that. I've decided that I would put the plug back on the lathe and just sand it down until I get a good fit. So when I get it ready to glue in, I'll show you where we're at. I did a little additional sanding, but I finally got the plug cut where it's going to fit. It starts to get a little bit snug right there, but I'm going to put a healthy dose of glue on the outer rim of it, or actually in the hole, and then I'm going to put a little tailstock pressure up against it to hold it secure against the bottom so it'll glue in. And then we're going to glue our other faceplate on this side. This is actually going to be the bottom of the bowl. We've got that glued in place. We're going to let that set up for a little while. I'll come back and start turning that just a little bit so that I can glue up my other faceplate to it, and that is going to actually be the bottom of the bowl. So it's not going to have a traditional foot on it where I'm going to be using 4-jaw chuck to hold it. I'm going to be using a faceplate, so I'll be preparing for that next. I've laid out what I want my bottom to look like. This first line right here is representative of where this glue block is going to go. So I'm going to cut a recess in there, and I'm going to make sure I've got a good level surface for it to glue to. And it will actually be glued in there when I'm done. This next line out here is representing what I'm going to call the foot of the bowl. I do want a foot to set on the tabletop or whatever surface it's setting on. So from here to here, it's going to be flat, and then a slight recess here. When I get through with it and I come back and turn this down, I will taper this down to that same recess that I make for the glue block before I part the glue block off. So it's going to have a slight foot. When it's all said and done, it's just going to be a concave surface underneath there. Then this line out here represents the maximum diameter that I can get out of the project. When it's all said and done, the bottom's actually going to be tapered up slightly, and then it'll start rounding off somewhere in here, but it'll round up into this thickness plus the thickness of that rim that we're going to put on here to make the depth of the bowl. So I'm going to start working on this now. Just wanted to kind of catch you up to what I've got in mind. I'm using a square-nosed scraper to just cut me a good flat surface for my glue block. I don't want it to be very deep. I'll probably make it about 3/16 maximum. That'll give me that much of a taper when I come back and finish out the foot when the bowl is complete. See if that's the diameter that I need. Yes, I've got a good fit right there. So when I get ready to glue this in, I'll be bringing my tailstock up to apply the pressure that I need to glue it. Actually, I won't be gluing it from this side. I'll turn it around, put this on the headstock, and then I'll use the other chuck that's already mounted, that it's mounted on now, to apply the pressure to glue it to the faceplate. So what I want to do now is establish just a shoulder out here. I'm going to use a parting tool for that, and then I'm going to start tapering this out just a little bit for the shape of the bottom. Okay, to cut down on the vibration out here, I am going to pull my tailstock back up, but I'm not going to use a point that will make a divot in the bottom of the bowl. So I'm just going to use this little scrapped piece of wood pressed up against it to help reduce that vibration as I'm shaping this outer rim, and it'll help me get a better cut. Okay, I'm going to start working on a taper, and I'll go about another 1/2 inch to taper that, start rounding this shoulder over. I don't want to go too much until I get everything glued up, so it'll give me some clamping pressure when I get ready to glue that next layer on. I'm going to make a few more passes from the outside in just to try to clean this up just a little bit. I've got a little bit of tear out at one of the joints that I want to try to get rid of. So I'm going to make another pass or two, and then we'll check it and see how it's doing. Okay, I got rid of the tear out that I was concerned with. You notice that I've got one glue joint that's got a little bit of a gap in it. Not real happy with that. I'll give some consideration to what I can do with that as I'm gluing that rim on. I might be able to add some glue to that and reinforce it just a little bit. I've got a little high spot right here I need to take out. I'm going to go ahead and round this rim over just a little bit more and get ready then to reverse this and glue that next ring on. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with the shape. I decided that I would go ahead and make this taper like it'll be when it's finished, and it'll make it a little bit easier for me when I get ready to part that faceplate off after the bowl's been turned. So I'm satisfied with that. I'm going to make a few more cuts with a scraper. I'm actually using a large skew as a negative rake scraper. I'm going to make another pass or two right here and then just ease this edge. I'm going to have to touch this edge again once I start turning the outer rim. But again, I'm leaving this thickness there so that I'll have some clamping pressure when I put that next piece of segmented ring on. You see the fine dust that I'm making? That's exactly what you want to do with the scraper. So I've got that clean enough that I'm ready to go ahead and start sanding. Okay, I've got this foot turned like I want it, ready to start sanding. Just to remind you that after I get it sanded out like I want it, then I am going to be putting this glue block on it, and then that's going to remain on it while I do the rest of the turning. So this will be what's driving the bowl once we get through with the bottom. I like to power sand. I'm going to be using this angle drill for my sanding purposes, and I'm using a backup pad. The thing that I like about these is they're quick thread, so it goes on really quick, It makes it also very quick to interchange grits. So rather than pulling pads off and changing the grit, I actually just changed the backup pads. So you'll see that I've got 5 of them here. I'm going to start with 120 grit. When we get to the other side, I may have to start with a coarser grit than that, maybe 80 grit or something like that. This is pretty clean, so I think 120 will be adequate. And then I'll graduate up to 150, 180, 220, and 320. So that's what I'll use to get my initial sanding done, and we'll see what it looks like there. So I'm going to show you the process, but I'm not going to bore you with a lot of sanding. I also want to turn the dust collector on, so I'll just show you a little bit of it, and then I'm going to hit the dust collector. I'm going to slow the lathe speed down. That's about 165 right there. Of course, that's in the center. It's spinning pretty fast on the outside. But I'm going to start right here and just work my way out and get a good, clean, finished surface. So you can see that I do need the dust collection on, so I'm going to turn the camera off. I'll bring you back when I'm ready to turn it around. I've got it sanded up through 220. I didn't mention this a little while ago, but I should mention that I do reverse the lathe rotation between grits. So my final grit's going to be 320. And I am going to reverse the lathe rotation when I sand with that. What I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and blow out the dust, and I'm going to inspect the cracks. I can see a few that need some attention. So I'm going to blow it off. I'm going to use some of the sawdust or sanding dust that I've made and some CA glue to fill some of these little voids and cracks. Make it look like a better finished product. Okay, so I'll start filling some of these. I'm going to do that off camera. I'll bring you back when I'm ready to do my final sanding, and then we'll get ready to flip this around. I've got it sanded all the way up through 320. I'm pretty pleased with the way that it sanded out. I'll wait and put the finish on it when I get the top of it turned. Because of that glue block, I'll be able to reach most of the bottom except where the glue block is actually mounted, and we'll turn that off and then finish it out. Okay, I've taken the platter off. I put my live center, threaded live center on my tailstock. So this will allow me to rotate it and get it located like I want. I'm going to put glue on this glue block. Then I'm going to bring my tailstock up and put pressure on it to allow it to get set. This faceplate and glue block are going to remain on the bowl then until we're ready to part it off and complete it. So after this is glued on, I will be turning this faceplate off and using it to mount that small center bowl or center segmented ring that we glued up yesterday. Okay, I've got it glued onto the glue block on the headstock now. I'm going to give that time to set up. Once it's set, then I'm going to come out here and true up my outer rim and get it ready to glue that outside segment. Before I glue that segment, I am going to part this glue block off, but I want to leave it in place while I'm turning this outside just because it's going to give me some stability, reduce the vibration. You may be wondering what kind of glue I've been using. I'm using this Titebond 3. It's a waterproof glue, and it does a good job on food grade type utensils and vessels. So this is my preferred glue for a project like this. I've given that glue some time to set up. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and start turning the face down. My objective here would be to get a good smooth surface so that that next ring can glue on here securely. And so I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning that up a little bit. We'll get it sanded down and get that ring ready to glue on. Okay, we've got a few more passes to make, get it all cleaned up, leveled out. Okay, that's looking really nice. I'll make sure that I've got it flat. Probably need to do a little bit of work to it to make sure it's good and flat, and then I'll start getting that ring ready to glue on. This circle that I've put on here is just kind of a reference point for me. The outside glue ring that we're going to put on, or the outside segmented ring that we're going to put on, the segments were 3 inches wide, and so that's a little bit more than 3 inches. I know that I need a clean surface all the way up to that. I'm going to need to remove this glue block before I finish this out and start gluing the rings on. I have not let this glue set up long enough to completely cure, so I'm going to take a break, let that glue set up, then I'll be back to remove this glue block, clean this face up, and glue the next 2 rings on. The glue has had adequate time to set up. I'm ready to part this glue block off, finish cleaning this up so that I can glue that first ring on. So that's what we're going to do now. So I don't know if you can see it, but the hot melt glue is melting, remelting, and making a mess of things. But what I wanted to do is get a little bit of a lip right here. I'm going to loosen my tailstock so that it has some give to it, and I'm going to get underneath this lip with a pry bar and see if I can start breaking it loose. So I've got this tailstock loose so that as this comes loose, it will back off. I'm starting to see a little bit of an air space in there. I'm going to find something that I can put in there and drive down against it. But I want to use extreme caution because I do not want to weaken the glue joint that's holding the back of the plate or the bowl on there. Okay, I went ahead and backed off the tailstock. I've taken the faceplate off the headstock. What I want to do is get some support underneath the bowl. So I'm just going to prop it like this. I'm going to take a chisel and put in here, the idea that I've got a solid support underneath it, and I'm just going to tap on it a few times and see if I can get break that glue joint. And that did not do it, so I'm going to work my way around until we get it off. Okay, success. Now that we've got this faceplate off, I'm going to take this opportunity to chuck this back up on the headstock and retrue this surface right here. I'm going to need to use this glue block to mount this center ring to, and then I will be able to glue it from the end into the center of this bowl. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of truing that up. Put my adapter on. Okay, I've got a high spot right here in the center. Turn that out, and then we'll sand it and have it ready to mount. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to drop my tailstock or my tool rest down so that I can ride my sanding board on top of it. Slow my lathe speed down. We'll true it up. For my sanding block, I've got 80 grit sandpaper on this side and 100 grit sandpaper on this side. You can see this one's pretty much worn out, time to replace. Okay, got a nice good surface there. So I'm going to step away and prepare that blank, or this segment. I'm going to put it in some jaws, so it'll automatically center it for me when I bring my tailstock up. We'll get it mounted on this block here. I've taken our center ring and mounted it here in my smaller Longworth chuck. It's mounted to a 4-jaw chuck, and then I've got it on the revolving tailstock center. I'm going to make a mark on this segmented ring. Basically, I'll just spin it and mark the outside of my glue block. I'm going to use hot glue on the surface right here to glue it on, and then I'll take my Longworth chuck off, set this aside, but this will be used then to press this ring into the base of the bowl. When I get through cleaning this up, we'll use that to glue it centered in the middle of the bowl. So we'll apply some hot glue. Get a little pressure on there. I'm going to put a couple of beads on the back. I'm not going to make a solid ring like I did before because this one is not going to be on here for long. I will sand the bottom smooth so that we get a good connection, good glue surface when we get ready to glue it up. But really that's about all that we need right now. That hot glue will set up real quick and then we'll be ready to move on to our next steps. Okay, I've remounted the base. As I told you earlier, I'm going to come back and true this face up. We'll get it sanded down smooth so that we're ready to glue our rings on. I've got a low spot right here, so I want to stay away from that area. Still a little bit high right here in the center. So I know I need to cut a little bit out right here. And then these other two areas that I marked, I want to stay away from, at least for a couple of passes. That's kind of a low spot, high spot. That spot right there is just slightly high. I'm going to try to take it down and then get ready to start sanding. Okay, I'm now seeing that we've got a low spot out here on the rim, and that's not going to be acceptable when we start trying to glue that rim, that outside ring on. So I'm going to need to work on that just a little bit. I'm going to go back to my measurement and kind of remark where I know that needs to be. That piece is, those segments were 3 inches. So I'm going to mark out here to about 3.5 and put that line, that mark back on there that we had earlier. And actually still see part of it. So the outside ring has got to be out here. The inside ring is going to be in here. What's in between them doesn't really matter. It's going to get turned away eventually. But for the purpose of truing the face up, it's easiest if we do the entire thing. So I'm going to give it a couple more shots. I'll bring you back when I've got it ready to glue the rings on. Okay, I've got this face trued up enough that I can go ahead and start sanding. My sanding block that you've watched me use before, the sanding board, it's really not long enough to do this an adequate job. And so, off camera, I decided I'd make a new one. I had an old 4x24-inch belt that had some damage to the edge of it, so I just tore it apart and glued it to a block of plywood, and I'm going to use that as my sanding board now. This is 80 grit, so it should do a good job. I'll show you just a few seconds of it, and then I'm going to turn the dust collector on, so I'll turn the camera off. That's rotating at about 350 is what it's telling me. You can see that's making a lot of dust. So I'm going to turn the camera off and turn the dust collector on. I've got the face of the bowl trued up enough that it's ready to accept the segmented rings. I've marked out the smaller ring just so I'll know where it's going to go. I did that to make sure that I had a good flat surface for it to glue to. I've checked the outer ring. I've got the outer ring mounted with my Walnut Chip. What I want to do before I actually glue this together is I'm going to use some denatured alcohol, clean the surface off, allow it time to dry, and then I'm going to spread my glue and bring this up. I'm going to use my tailstock to clamp it, but once I've got my tailstock pulled up and started clamping, then I'm going to also put some squeeze clamps on it just to make sure I have a good solid glued surface. So I'm going to put a little denatured alcohol on a rag here and just clean off any sawdust that might still be there, so it'll help ensure that I get a good solid glue joint. And you may notice this mark that I put right here. That is a joint on that smaller inside ring. I followed that up and I marked the center of this same segment up here to make sure that when I glue this outer ring up that I have it lined up. I want the outer ring and the inner ring to look like they were one solid piece. I'm going to turn the camera off while I spread glue. I'll get it glued up, show you how I'm going to clamp it then, and we'll turn the camera off while I'm gluing. Okay, you can see how I've got this glued up. Not only do I have pressure from my tailstock pushing the segmented piece up against the base, but I came back and I put these clamps on it as well. I'll let that set up for a couple of hours and then take this off. I can actually go ahead and remove my Walnut Chip now. I do not have any of these clamps pressed against it. So I'll do that and go ahead and prepare that inside segment, inside ring to be glued up. I now have the center ring glued in as well. My tailstock is providing the pressure to it. Remember that we glued the center ring onto this faceplate. One of the things that I want to be able to use this faceplate for is when I remove the clamps in the morning and start turning the outside of the bowl, I want this faceplate to remain in place, pressing against that center ring to help reduce the vibration. That'll allow me to finish the outside of the bowl, go ahead and start making some of the cuts on the inside of the bowl, maybe true up the circle part of the segment on the outside ring and the inside ring before I actually have to part this off to complete that inside and to finish the shaping of the bowl. So that's where we are now. I'm going to let this dry, set up overnight, and then I'll bring you back in the morning when I start turning the final project. We've had it in the clamps overnight, and I'm going to remove the clamps now and go ahead and start turning the outside of the bowl, start designing that shape, including a little bit of a rim that would give us a grip on this large vessel. Okay, we've got good tight glue joints. We'll start turning this outside, get it shaped like we want it, and then move to the inside. Okay, I've relocated the camera just so that you can kind of see what I did with the profile. on this outside of the bowl. The little bit of a lip that I put on here, it is just enough to get a grip if you've got something weighty in your hands and you're moving it from the countertop to the tabletop or vice versa. So I'm ready to do my finish sanding on here. I've sanded up to 220 grit. I also wanted to show you this little sponge that I'll use. A 3-inch sanding pad fits on that. It's got a Velcro attachment to it. And I'll use that as my final sanding, and then we'll get to the inside. And you may notice that the lathe is spinning in reverse. Okay, I've set up to start working on the inside. I'm going to cut a lot of this wood away right here, but what my objective is going to be initially is to get it turned down round, get these flat edges off of it, do the same thing to this inside, and then I'll start working on my cup where the chip part's going to be held. Keep in mind that the outer rim will wind up, the top of it's going to be a little more than a 1/2 inch thick. The edge bowl, or the sides of the bowl, the walls will only be about 3/8 to 1/4 inch thick. So there's a lot of wood that's got to be removed now, but it's going to taper so that it kind of gives me a U shape in the bottom of the bowl, and so that's why I needed this much stock to work with. I am going to be using a carbide tool some as I cut this out. So I'm going to start with the round carbide cutter and see how well it works, and we'll go from there. My lathe's spinning at about 685 RPM. Okay, you can see that I've got this pretty much straight. There's still a little bit of flat right there, so I've got some work to do on it. I'm going to keep alternating back and forth between them as I give myself some room to maneuver the tool. But I've got a lot of wood to remove, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera off. I'll bring you back when I got the majority of this cut away and show you how we're going to start shaping the bowl in. I'm down to about a 1 inch thickness left out here. I'm starting to check with my caliper to make sure that I don't cut too deep. And I also need to be conscientious of the bowl depth along with the wall. And I've still got a little over 1 inch thickness in the bottom of the bowl right here. So I've got a good bit of turning to do. I'll turn the camera back off and bring you back as we get a little bit closer. Okay, checking my thickness at the bottom. I'm still a little over 1 inch thick. On my sidewalls up high, I'm down to about 3/4, 5/8 of an inch. So I'm getting close enough here. I'm going to have to start checking about every second, third pass until I get that refined like I want it. I want the finished thickness of the wall to be about 3/4 of it, or excuse me, 3/8 of an inch. Because I was starting to get a lot of tool hanging off of my tool rest, I've repositioned the tool rest. It's getting a little bit grabby in there, and that's when you tend to get a catch. So I wanted to reposition, and I'll just be working from the center of the bottom now over to this rim until I get it about where I want it, and then I'll turn my attention back to the inside ring. Okay, we're getting pretty close on this outside wall. I still want to take another 1/8 of an inch or so out, and then I've got quite a bit more down low and in the bottom still. What I've discovered is that a push cut is starting to catch on me a little bit, and so rather than pushing in now, I'm working from the bottom out with the pull cut, and it's doing a much better job. So I'll show you a little bit of that, and then we'll turn it back off, and I'll bring you back when I'm a little closer. Hey, you may have also noticed that the bowl is starting to vibrate a little bit out here. You can hear that high-pitched noise. It wasn't quite as bad that cut as it has been in a few of the previous cuts. So I'm trying to use extreme caution now. I'm going to keep checking my thickness of the wall and the bottom as I get this outside rim finished up. And then I'll go back to work right in here on this area. And then we'll do some sanding before we take this faceplate off and start turning the inside. Okay, I've got this down to about 1/2 of an inch from this point in the bottom around the rim, the outside of the bowl. I've got a little high spot in there. I'm going to try to work that out, but I'm getting enough vibration now because it's such a large diameter. I'm not going to spend much more time on that. I may wind up having to take care of any bumps in it with sandpaper. You'll notice that I've got a sheen on part of the wood. I wanted to explain what I did there. Something that I found that works very well for me. When I start getting ready to make my final passes, especially if I'm using a scraper, I like to use this Orange Glow product. It's designed for wood furniture, but I found that it works very well as a lubricant. Spray it on the wood. Of course, it makes the walnut really pop, but what I want to do is just put a coat in here, and then I'll use a shop towel to just dry off the excess. But it works very well if you've got some torn grain, or if you are making that final pass. This will make it much smoother for you, and will reduce the amount of sanding that you're going to have to do. So, not ideal to be spraying on the lathe. Works very well for this purpose. So I'm going to make one final cut right here. I'm going to stop probably when I start feeling that vibration. It's pretty much this top ring part that's starting to create some grief for me. So I don't want to go too far and take a chance of getting a catch. Okay, I'm going to call that good. I do have a little bit of a high spot right here. I'm not feeling comfortable in trying to get that out with my tools now, so I'm going to rely on sandpaper to finish that out. I'm now going to start working on this inside. I don't want to take much more of this diameter off until I've removed the glue block and made some measurements in here for my recess. Starting to work on the inside now. You might not be able to tell it from the camera angle, but I've got a high spot right here still that I need to turn down. I've had to change tool rest. I'm going to be using a pull cut again. It does help prevent the grabbiness with this carbide tool. So I'll be working my way right here up to this inside ring, and then I'm going to stop. Like I said, after I get this finished out, I'm going to do some sanding, and then I will remove this glue block so I can lay out what I want my inside to be. And I'll probably still have to come back and do some work on this outside wall of the inner bowl, but I want to make sure that I get my layout right for the salsa dish. So I'll make a few cuts just to kind of show you how it's working, and then I'll turn the camera back off. Okay, I've got this turned where I've got a real nice transition. Looking for tear out. Really the only place I've got a little bit of tear out is right here where that transition goes, where the top ring was glued to that bottom ring. I think that I can get that with the sanding process. So I'm pretty satisfied with what I've got right here. I'm going to go ahead and get set up to sand it. I'll bring you back when I'm done. Okay, I've sanded this. I had to resort to 60 grit to get those high spots out, but I'm really satisfied with what I've done with the 60 grit. I'm going to now start sanding through the grits, and I'll sand all the way up to 320 like I did on the others. I did want to show you the pad that I'm using. I'm currently using a 5-inch Velcro back pad that I use on my random orbit sander, but I bought one of these pads, and it's come in very handy for using for purposes like this. So I'm going to switch grits and jump up to 80 grit just to kind of go through the grits. I don't want to skip a step now and have scratch marks that I wind up having to try to buff out later. So I'll show you a little bit about how this works, and then finish it up. The lathe is spinning in reverse right now, but this works very well for a big bowl like this, and I've got a big hand. I can just work it in. Because it's flexible, it rolls on that contour. It does a very good job sanding that out smooth. Okay, I've removed my tailstock. I'm going to remove this glue block now. To do that, I'm going to actually take the bowl off the lathe, and I'm going to hold it in my lap while I put a chisel in here and wrap it with the mallet a few times to break the rest of that glue. I've already used a parting tool to get down there, almost 1/2 inch, so there's not much left holding it on there, but we'll take that off. I want to be safe doing it. I don't want to risk tapping it while it's still on the lathe and put pressure on the glue joint on the back. Okay, got the glue block off fairly easy. What I'm going to do now is clean this surface up right here. I'm going to make some measurements for the bowl and for the recesses that I need to cut, and I'll come back to show you what I've got laid out when I get that completed. This is the bowl that we'll use as a salsa dish, guacamole, whatever we're serving with chips. The outside rim is 5.5 inches, and so what I've done is I've made a mark there where that outside rim will recess. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a parting tool and just start working or nibbling away at this. I may use a square carbide cutter, but I'm going to recess that down deep enough that this will set into it easily, and then I'm also going to recess it so that I can come back out here on this outer rim, make a rabbet joint that my piece of corian sets down in. And I'll make it slightly undersized and then do a trial fit and just kind of sneak up on it. I want it to be a fairly snug fit. Okay, not quite there. I'm going to make it a little bit deeper and just come out slightly. I'm going to switch to a carbide cutter, and it'll help me remove that a little bit faster. Okay, still slightly small for it. I also want to cut it a little bit deeper. Okay, it's still just a little bit small, so I need to make a slight cut right here on the outside edge, and that bowl will be good to go. Okay, I like that. This is a piece of corian that I've selected. I'll be cutting it round, and it'll set on top of that bowl then. So I'll need to cut a rabbet joint around it. I'm going to take a break real quick and put a faceplate on this. I've already marked the center. I made a rough cut on a bandsaw, but I have not trued it up, so I want to do that next. and then go ahead and cut my rabbet joint out here. Have this outer part of the rim set like I want it, and then I'll come back in and start turning this out so that the bowl will actually sit down in it. Got this piece of solid surface countertop. I generally refer to it as Corian, but that is a brand name, not sure it is. Anyway, I've done a rough cut on the bandsaw. What I want to do now is true the edge, get a perfect disc out of it, and then I'll polish it and get ready to put it in the recess. I need to cut that recess after I get it sized. I'm holding this on that glue block with just hot melt glue. If you've ever worked with this, you know that it makes a mess, and so I've got a little cleaning up to do. I want to clean up some of the mess, and then I'm going to come back and sand this down and get it cleaned up really nice, and then I'll polish it before I take it off the glue block. Okay, I've got this trued up. It's just slightly larger than 6 inches. I've sanded the face up through 320. What I'm going to do now is apply some abrasive paste. What I'm using is the Axe abrasive sanding paste. Get that covered good. After I buff that off, then I'm going to use some plastic polish to clean it up, and we'll be good to go. This is the polishing paste that I like to use. It's primarily used for jewelry. I don't remember where I found it, but you would have to look around to find some of this, but it does a great job on anything plastic. Okay, you can probably see the shine that it produced. Does a really nice job. Because this is going to be used for food, I'm going to come back with some denatured alcohol and just go over it so that I remove any kind of residue that may be left behind. Okay, our little insert turned out really nice. Got it polished out, cleaned up the glue on the back. I'll do a little bit of sanding on that, but there's no need for me to polish that out. But it'll inset like that. So what I want to do now is go ahead and start working on my rabbet joint for that inset. And while we were off camera, I went ahead and measured the depth of my bowl. And from the top of the rim to the bottom of the bowl is 2 inches. And so I know I'm going to have to cut some of this base out. What I've decided to do is go ahead and make the recess for the bowl slightly deeper than it is now, so that I can make the recess for my cheese tray at least half the thickness here. So that's going to be almost 1/4 inch. I've got a mark on there, but I need to draw a circle. And that's a little bit undersized. I'm going to cut that, and then we'll start working to get a fit. Okay, that's where we want it right there. It's tight enough that it's not going to slide around much, but I want it loose enough that it's not going to get jammed in there. So what I need to do now is cut it down about half the thickness, so I've got about another 1/8 of an inch to go. I'm going to go ahead and recess this a little bit more prior to doing that. Okay, I like that fit. It sits in there, you know, about half the thickness of the countertop material. Got the bowl recessed where it'll fit nice. I may have to adjust it just a little bit because I do want this to sit down on top of it and set snug. So what I'm going to do now is start rounding this out in the center, and then I'll start tapering it down like I need to, cut a little bit of depth out of the bottom to fit the bowl. Okay, so I need to start working on a taper. The bottom is going to be a little bit larger than this, just the way that I had to glue it up. But I'm going to start working on a taper from this the outside edge right here down to the bottom, and I also need to cut a little bit of depth into the bottom so that the bowl recesses. So the taper's good enough. I just need to work on this look right here and get a little more depth. Okay, the bowl sets down below this recess now, and then the piece of countertop sits on top of that, sets in good and flush against the wood. So I'm through cutting. I think that this can be sanded out. Where that plug is in there, it's got some pretty rough grain in there. I'll have to sand that down pretty good, but that's what is up next. I've got it sanded up through 220. I'm fixing to sand with 320. Once I get through sanding it, then I'm going to burnish it, and then I'm going to come back and wipe it down with denatured alcohol, give that time to dry. Basically, I'll just be getting all the dust out of it and all, and then we'll be ready to start applying our finish. Now comes the moment of truth. We're going to put our finish on it, our first coat of finish. I'm using Mahoney's utility finish. It is a walnut oil, and it does very well on food grade surfaces like this. So this is my finish of choice on this particular project. And you can see that it does make that walnut pop. I want to get it pretty wet when I'm coating it to make sure that there's an adequate coverage so that it does soak into the wood. So you'll see me keep reapplying to the little rag that I've got here. I'll go ahead and do the back. I won't do the foot because we're going to need to part that glue block off, and I'll have to do some sanding once we've got that removed. Okay, I'm going to turn the lathe on slow now and just make sure I've got it good and covered. As it's rotating, I'll hold the cloth up against it. Okay, we've got a good coverage. It's pretty wet right now. What I'm going to do is just leave it to dry for a good 30 minutes to an hour. I'll come back and buff it down and then recoat it. Okay, I've got 2 coats of finish on it now. I have reverse mounted it so that we can remove the glue plate and my face plate, my glue block and face plate. So I'm going to need to start parting this off. I'm going to go as deep as I can with the parting tool that I have, and then I will saw it off the rest of the way. I'll bring my tailstock up to give me some support, and then I'll turn off the remaining portion of that glue block and clean up the bottom. Let's get started. I have a larger parting tool that I'm going to use. This one's a 3/16 inch diamond parting tool, but it's got a longer shaft on it, which is going to allow me to cut a little bit deeper into the waste block before I get ready to go to the saw. Getting a lot of tear out on this end grain side, so I'm going to adjust my tool rest just a little bit, see if I can help correct that issue. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go to the saw now, and I'm just going to saw off the waste block, and then we'll part off the end of it, or clean it up. Alright, we're back. I managed to part that glue block off. It did give me a little bit of grief, but I got it parted off, got the bottom cleaned up. You remember that we put this plug in there. What I did off camera was I took a thin bladed skew and I used the point of it and I cut a shallow recess just on the outside of that plug. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to burn that ring, and then I'll use the inside of that when I write my label on it. What I'm going to use to burn it with is a piece of plastic laminate countertop material. Don't really know what the brand name is, but it's just a scrap piece. It works very well for burning on something that you can't use a wire for. And so I'm going to spin the lathe at about 250 and see if that's going to heat it up enough to give us a little burn line. And it doesn't take long to start building a little bit of friction. It does take a little bit longer for it to start smoking like you would with a wire, but we're going to see how much it will. There's probably a little bit of glue left on the wood right there because of that glue joint. So I'm going to speed up just a little bit to get a little more heat, but I'm cautious as to how fast I want to turn with this Longworth chuck. Most cold jaw chucks are rated at about 600 RPM, and I wouldn't want to come close to that speed with this. Okay, that looks like that's about the best we're going to get. I think that probably the glue joint is preventing it from heating up like it needs to give me a good burn ring. While I've still got it mounted up, I'm going to hit that with some 220 grit sandpaper real quick just to knock some feathers off. That ought to take care of that. And you may be asking yourself, what am I about to do? I've got a logo that's cut out of a piece of 1/8 inch plywood. And so I'm going to cut a 1/8 inch recess here, or not quite 1/8 of an inch, and insert that logo. So I'm just going to barely cut into it and then see how well we can make it fit. Okay, so there's the logo, not quite deep enough, so I'll go just a little bit deeper. I'm not worried about my depth right here and going through the bottom because I did measure that, and I've got plenty of room for this 1/8 inch recess. Okay, that's getting closer, but I still need a little bit more, so we'll finish it off with this cut. And here we are with our completed project. A cheese and cracker bowl. We can remove the piece of corian. We have a chip and dip bowl. We can remove the bowl, put nuts in here, and then we have a nut bowl. So it's a combination bowl. Hope you've enjoyed the process I went through in creating this. If you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to try to answer them. Thank you.